denied service because of her skin. A powerful CEO turned the tables and, in just 5 minutes, changed the lives of an entire bank branch forever. The morning sun shone brightly over the city as Dr. Tanya Harris stepped out of her sleek black car and looked up at the bank building in front of her. She adjusted the strap on her leather handbag and held a folder tightly in her left hand. It was just a regular Tuesday morning, and Tanya had a long list of things to do. One of those things was a quick visit to this downtown branch of a bank she had worked with for years. It was supposed to be a short stop, in and out in maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Nothing complicated, nothing dramatic. Tanya had done this sort of thing hundreds of times. She ran a successful tech company that worked with many partners, and this bank handled a part of her company's payroll processing. There had been a recent change in the payroll agreement. She needed to submit a few signed documents in person to ensure there were no delays. A small task, really. Her assistant had asked if she wanted someone else to drop the papers off, but Tanya didn't mind doing it herself. She liked staying involved, even in the small things. It helped her stay grounded. She also knew the staff. Here, at least, she thought she did. As she walked through the glass doors of the bank, she took a deep breath. The place looked almost exactly the same as the last time she had visited. Clean, quiet, air-conditioned, the kind of professional calmness you expect in a financial institution. A few customers sat in plastic chairs near the entrance, scrolling through their phones or waiting their turn. Behind the counter were 3 employees. One was working at a computer. Another was filing papers. The third, a man in a navy blue shirt and tie, looked like the branch manager. Tanya gave them all a polite smile. She walked up to the front desk and waited until one of the tellers looked up. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I need to speak with the branch manager about submitting some payroll documents." The teller, a young woman with short curly hair, gave her a quick glance and didn't smile back. "What is it about?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a tone that felt cold and uninterested. Tanya held up her folder. "I'm the CEO of Harris Tech. We've made some updates to our payroll partnership, and I have the final paperwork to hand in. I was told to come in person to avoid any delay in processing." The teller raised an eyebrow. "You're the CEO?" "Yes," Tanya replied, still calm, still polite. The woman looked past Tanya, as if checking for someone else. "Have an appointment?" "I was told I didn't need one. It's just a drop-off, but the manager may need to verify the signatures." The teller gave her a tight nod and turned to speak with the man in the navy blue shirt. Tanya watched as they exchanged a few quiet words. Then the man stood up and walked over. He had the look of someone who thought he was very important. His face wore the same tight expression, one of discomfort rather than welcome. "Can I help you?" he asked, even though he had clearly heard what Tanya said a moment earlier. "Yes," she repeated patiently. "I'm Dr. Tanya Harris, CEO of Harris Tech. I need to submit these payroll documents. I was told to bring them in person." The manager glanced at her folder, but didn't make a move to take it from her. "We're not able to accept business paperwork unless it's brought in by the account holder or someone with authorization." "I am the account holder," Tanya said simply. "And the CEO?" The man frowned slightly. "Do you have ID?" "Of course," she said, reaching into her bag. She handed over her driver's license and a copy of the signed authorization form from the bank's own business department. He held the ID for only a second, barely looking at it, then gave it back. "Still, I'm afraid I can't help you. Today, maybe you can come back with the person who handles finances for the company." Tanya stared at him, confused. "That person is me. I handle the finances. I'm the CEO. This is my company." The manager looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, disbelief, maybe even something worse. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he asked. Tanya paused, her heart beating a little faster now. "Yes, I'm sure. I've been to this branch before." Another employee nearby, who had been watching the exchange quietly, let out a small laugh, as if something about this situation was amusing. Tanya looked from one face to the other. No one was smiling. No one seemed willing to help. They didn't look busy. They didn't seem confused. They simply didn't believe her. That much was clear now. "I'm sorry," the manager said again. "We're not able to assist you at this time." Tanya looked down at the folder in her hands, then back up at the people standing behind the counter. She had spent her whole life pushing past people who thought she didn't belong, people who assumed things about her based on her skin color, her gender, her voice, her presence. She had ignored the comments, the stares, the doors that were closed, just a little tighter when she approached. She had learned to smile through it, to stay composed, to rise above. But in this moment, something inside her was different. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't beg them to believe her. Instead, she carefully placed her ID and paperwork back into her handbag, turned around, and walked calmly out the door. The sunlight hit her face as she stepped back onto the sidewalk. She blinked for a moment, then walked to her car. Inside, she sat still for a few seconds, letting the silence settle over her. She had just been denied service at a bank, not because she had done anything wrong, but because the people inside couldn't imagine that a black woman in a sharp suit, with confidence in her voice, could be the CEO of a successful tech company. Tanya's hands rested on the steering wheel. For a brief moment, she thought about driving away and letting it go. Maybe chalk it up to another bad day. Maybe file a quiet complaint and move on, but no, not this time. Not today. She took a deep breath and opened her laptop. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she logged into her company's executive dashboard. She opened her email and pulled up the internal contact list, and she made a phone call while the employees inside the bank were returning to their paperwork and talking casually among themselves. Tanya Harris was putting a series of events into motion that would change everything for them. She wasn't just a CEO. She was the CEO, and she was about to remind them, and everyone watching, that power doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Sometimes it walks in quietly, with grace and a folder full of papers. Sometimes it smiles politely while being insulted. Sometimes it returns, not with anger, but with the authority to make sure justice is done. The air inside the bank felt heavier than it should have. Tanya Harris had walked in that morning with a clear task and a calm mind. Everything had been in order, her documents, her ID, her explanation, yet somehow she had walked out of the building without being helped. Not because of an error or a lack of appointment, not because of any policy problem. She had walked out because the people inside simply didn't believe who she was. In her years of running Harris Tech, Tanya had experienced a lot. Long hours, tough clients, risky deals, last-minute pivots, and unexpected failures. But she had also seen great success, recognition, and respect. She had spoken at global conferences, signed multi-million-dollar contracts, and been featured in business magazines. She had earned her place. But this, being judged and denied service based on appearance, reminded her of the silent battles she still had to fight. Even now, as Tanya sat in her car, she replayed the scene in her head. She had walked in with confidence. She had spoken. Clearly, she had presented her documents, but their faces had shown something she couldn't ignore. Disbelief, judgment, disrespect. It wasn't new to her. She had seen that same look before. She had seen it in school when teachers assumed she was less capable. She had seen it at business meetings when men spoke over her. She had seen it in real estate offices when she was questioned about affording a property. But every time she had pushed forward, every time she had proved them wrong. But today, something was different. It wasn't just disrespect, it was dismissal. They didn't just doubt her. They had decided she didn't belong. They didn't ask questions. They didn't try to understand. They had simply looked at her, a black woman in a business suit, and decided that she couldn't possibly be the CEO. She couldn't possibly be the person in charge. She couldn't possibly hold power. The quiet sting of that moment sat heavy in her chest. Tanya didn't cry. She didn't get angry. Instead, she became focused. Focus was her strength. It was how she had built her company from a small idea into a national success. It was how she had survived tough investor meetings and late nights filled with doubt, and it was how she was going to handle this situation now, not with emotion, but with purpose. She pulled out her phone and called Her assistant? "Hi, Michelle," she said calmly. "Can you confirm whether that downtown bank branch is still under our payroll services agreement?" Michelle, a sharp and efficient woman, didn't need long. "Yes," she said. "They're one of our corporate partner branches. They process part of the employee payment cycle for our East Region offices." Why did something happen? Tanya paused. "I just had a strange experience there. I wasn't helped. They didn't believe who I was. I'll explain more soon, but I'll need you to get me the contact for their regional director. Also, pull up our partnership terms. I want to see the staff oversight agreement." Michelle understood immediately. On it. As Tanya ended the call, her mind was already moving ahead. She remembered every face she had seen inside that bank. The manager who looked her up and down, the teller who spoke with sarcasm, the employee who smirked in the background. She remembered how they made her feel small, how they acted as if her success didn't matter, as if her presence didn't count, but they didn't know the full picture. Tanya's company didn't just do business with the bank. Harris Tech was a valued partner, which gave her executive influence on branch partnerships. That meant she had a say in how the branches served their clients. It meant she could file reports that triggered audits. And in some cases it meant she could make personnel recommendations, even decisions. These employees had looked at her and seen just another customer. They had no idea that she was also someone who could impact their careers. But Tanya wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about responsibility. She knew that this wasn't just about her. What if someone else walked into that bank and was treated the same way? What if a young black entrepreneur came in full of hope and left feeling like she wasn't enough? What if someone elderly or someone who didn't speak perfect English was ignored? Tanya had a voice. She had power. And she had to use it not to get back at people, but to demand better. Her laptop was open on the passenger seat. She quickly typed up a detailed description of what had happened. Time, location, behavior, comments. She saved it, then began drafting an internal report. Harris Tech had a corporate compliance department, and she was going to make sure this wasn't brushed aside. She also opened her email and wrote a message to the regional bank director, explaining that she had just experienced an unacceptable situation at one of their branches. She requested a call immediately. Use her title to intimidate. She used it to open doors. But once the door was open, she made sure the truth walked in with her. Her phone buzzed. Michelle had sent everything she needed: a copy of the payroll branch agreement, a direct number for the regional director, and a note confirming that the partnership gave Tanya executive-level access to performance reviews at the branch level. Tanya read it all quickly and smiled. Calmly, she dialed the number. A few rings later, a man answered. "This is Robert Kinney, Regional Director of Operations. How can I help you?" "Hello, Mr. Kinney. This is Dr. Tanya Harris, CEO of Harris. I believe we've met once at a financial tech summit in Dallas last year." "Ah, yes, of course," he said, his tone immediately shifting into respect. "It's a pleasure to speak with you. What can I do for you?" "I'm calling about a serious incident that just took place at your downtown branch." She explained the situation in clear, careful detail. She told him how she was dismissed, how her ID was ignored, how her role was questioned, and how she was ultimately denied service without reason. Mr. Kinney listened without interruption. "That's deeply troubling," he said when she finished. "I assure you, this is not how we operate." "I am very sorry for your experience. I appreciate your words," Tanya said. "But I'm more interested in actions. I've already begun an internal compliance report through my team. I'm also submitting a formal review request on this branch's behavior under the terms of our partnership." "I understand," he said. "Would you like us to launch a personnel investigation?" "Yes," Tanya replied. "Immediately, and I would like the staff involved to be temporarily removed from public interaction until that review is complete. This is a matter of professional misconduct and racial bias." There was a pause. Then Mr. Kinney responded, "I'll handle it personally. I'm truly sorry this happened. We'll take this seriously." Tanya ended the call and looked out the windshield. Her hands were steady. Her voice had remained calm. But inside, she felt the quiet fire that had carried her through every battle she had ever faced. This wasn't just about paperwork anymore. This was about respect. It's about dignity. About truth. She looked at the bank building again. The same people who had refused to help her were still inside, likely going about their day as if nothing had happened. They didn't know she had made the call. They didn't know a report was already being filed. They didn't know the regional director himself was now watching, and they definitely didn't know she was about to walk back in. Tanya opened the car door and stepped out. Her steps were calm, her face composed. She didn't carry anger. She carried certainty. She walked straight to the glass doors and entered the bank once again, her folder still in hand. As she entered, heads turned. The manager saw her and blinked in confusion. The teller who had spoken to her earlier glanced at the manager nervously. Something was different this time. Tanya didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence was enough. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to make them see what they had missed, the truth about who she was. And soon, they would learn exactly what kind of mistake they had made. Because Tanya Harris wasn't just a woman with a folder, she was the CEO. They refused to serve, and now they would have to answer for it. Tanya Harris stood just outside the bank doors for a few seconds, breathing deeply and gathering her thoughts. She wasn't nervous. She was calm, focused, and ready. 5 minutes ago, she had been treated like she didn't belong. She was walking back inside not as a customer, but as a woman in full control of the situation. She wasn't just the CEO of a fast-growing tech company. She was also a major corporate partner with the power to take real action as she stepped through the doors, her heels tapping softly against the tiled floor. A few people inside looked up. There was a subtle change in the air. The same teller who had refused to help her earlier was still standing behind the desk. Her face shifted from relaxed to tense in just a moment. She gave a quick glance toward the branch manager, who stood near one of the cubicles holding a coffee cup and talking to another employee. When he saw Tanya, his body stiffened slightly. His eyes widened. He wasn't smiling this time. Tanya didn't waste a second. She walked straight to the front desk, the same spot where she had stood earlier, and looked the teller in the eye. "I'd like to speak to the branch manager," she said in a firm, polite tone. The teller didn't say a word. She just turned quickly and walked toward the manager, whispering something to him. The manager's face went pale for a moment. He set his coffee down and slowly walked over, trying to seem confident. "Hello again," he said carefully, but there was no sign of the arrogance he had shown earlier. "Was there something we missed?" "I thought we already—" Tanya raised her hand slightly, stopping him mid-sentence. "You refused to help me. You dismissed my identity. You ignored my credentials and showed clear bias." "I wasn't going to explain myself again, but now I don't need to. I've already spoken to your regional director." The manager's face tightened. He opened his mouth to speak, but Tanya continued. "In fact," she said, "your branch is under corporate review as we speak. An official report is being processed through Harris Deck's compliance office, and your regional team is preparing a formal response. You will be contacted shortly regarding your behavior." The employees nearby turned their heads to listen. A quiet tension filled the space, and even the customers who were seated began to notice something unusual was happening. The manager looked uncomfortable. I wasn't aware of that. I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Tanya replied clearly. "You didn't believe I was the CEO because I didn't fit the image you had in your head. You treated me as if I didn't belong here, and your staff supported that attitude with silence and smirks. It's not just poor customer service, it's discrimination. And in a business partnership, that has consequences." The manager was sweating now. "Please," he said nervously, "we can sit down and talk. I'm sure we can work something out." But Tanya had already made up her mind. She turned slightly and pulled out her phone. She opened her messages and typed a quick line to Michelle, her assistant, "On site now. Ready to move forward. Confirm executive step." Within seconds, her phone buzzed again. "Confirmed. Regional director in loop. You have authority to proceed. All actions backed by agreement. Clause 9.3 Branch Behavior Standards. Tanya put her phone away. She looked directly at the manager. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "This is about accountability. You didn't just insult me. You insulted what I represent. It's every hardworking woman, every black professional, every leader who's ever walked into a room and been doubted because of how they looked, to insulted them too." The manager's mouth opened slightly. He had no response. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides. Just then, another call came. Through on Tanya's phone. She stepped a few feet away to answer it. "Dr. Harris, this is Robert Kinney again," said the voice on the other end. "I just spoke with our legal team. Based on the severity of the situation and our agreement with Harris Deck, you are authorized to request immediate dismissal of the involved personnel. Would you like us to initiate that now?" Tanya glanced over at the bank employees, who were now whispering to each other and watching her with nervous eyes. "Yes," she said firmly. "Let's begin." "Understood," Mr. Kinney replied. "We'll have HR send formal termination notices today. The affected employees will be removed from duty within the hour. Security will assist if necessary." Tanya hung up and turned back toward the staff. The manager, sensing what had just happened, took a small step back. He looked shaken. "You've just been relieved of your duties," Tanya said to him. "Your official termination will arrive soon. I suggest you prepare to leave." He opened his mouth as if to protest, but no words came out. The teller behind the desk stared in disbelief. Another staff member, who had laughed earlier during Tanya's first visit, looked stunned. "I want each of you to remember this moment," Tanya said. "This is what happens when you judge someone by their appearance instead of treating them with respect. I didn't come in here asking for special treatment. I came for a simple service, just like anyone else. But your reaction wasn't based on policy. It was based on prejudice. And that's not something I take lightly." The manager finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Please, we didn't mean it that way. We didn't know. You didn't care." "To know," Tanya said. "That's the difference." Security staff from the building began to approach as part of the corporate response. One of them quietly escorted the manager to his desk to collect his belongings. The other employees who had taken part in the situation were also approached. It was all happening quickly, but professionally. Customers watched silently. Some looked confused, others impressed. One woman near the back gave Tanya a small nod of support. Tanya turned toward the door. As she walked out, she felt no satisfaction, only clarity. She didn't enjoy making people lose their jobs. She didn't celebrate their failure. But she also couldn't ignore their actions. Respect must be earned, but it must also be given. And today, the people in that bank had failed to give it. Outside, the sun was still shining. Cars passed by, unaware of what had just happened inside. Tanya stood on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. She thought of all the times she had held back. All the times she had smiled through the insult, the doubt, the quiet rejection. But this time she had acted, and in doing so, she had sent a message louder than any speech could deliver. She was no longer the quiet girl from a struggling neighborhood. She was no longer the student working twice as hard to prove she belonged. She was no longer the young professional overlooked in meetings. She was now the CEO of a powerful company. She had earned her voice, and she had used it. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Michelle. "News has already reached corporate board. They're standing by your decision. Media may contact you. Want me to draft a statement?" Tanya thought for a moment. She wasn't planning to go public. But maybe, just maybe, it was time people heard the truth about how bias still lives in places we don't expect. Maybe it was time others were reminded that power can wear any skin, speak in any voice, walk in any form. She replied, "Draft it. Simple and clear. No names. Just the truth." Then she got into her car, started the engine, and drove away. There were still meetings to attend, deals to close, dreams to chase. But something had changed. Not just for her, for everyone watching. Tanya Harris had walked out of the bank with her head high, but she didn't feel triumphant. She felt something deeper, like she had just carried out a duty, not only for herself but for all those who had ever been mistreated in silence. The way the bank staff had looked at her, questioned her, doubted her, and dismissed her, it wasn't just a personal insult. It was a symptom of a much bigger problem, a problem she had faced many times before. But this time, she had not walked away. This time, she had taken action. And now, things were beginning to change. As she drove back to her office, her phone kept buzzing. Her assistant, Michelle, was keeping her updated. The regional director had contacted the bank's corporate HR department. The review of the staff was no longer just a suggestion. It had become an active investigation, and the news of the incident was already spreading within the bank's internal network. Tanya didn't need to tell the world what had happened. Word was traveling fast on its own. By the time Tanya stepped into her office, her leadership team had already gathered. Some had heard bits of the story, others were just hearing it now. But the mood in the room was the same quiet support and deep respect. Michelle handed Tanya a printed document. Here's the draft statement we discussed in case you want to release something to the public or share it with your employees. Tanya took the paper and read it carefully. The words were simple. There were no names, no finger-pointing, just facts. It explained how a senior executive was recently denied service due to racial bias, and how swift action had been taken to correct the situation. It talked about the need for respectful treatment at every level of society and business. It ended with a message of strength, not anger, but leadership. Tanya nodded slowly. Good. Let's hold it for now. If the story leaks or spreads, we'll be ready. She sat down at the conference table and looked at her team. These were people who had worked beside her through years of building and growing Haristech. Many of them knew her story. They knew she had started the company in her small apartment, with nothing but a laptop and an idea. They had seen her sleep in the office during hard weeks. They had watched her fight for funding, build systems, train teams, and grow something out of nothing. And now they saw her fighting once again, this time, not for business, but for dignity. One of her senior directors, a middle-aged man named Jordan, spoke gently. Tanya, I just want to say what you did this morning was powerful. A lot of people would have walked away, but you didn't. You held them accountable. Tanya gave a small smile. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because I was tired of letting it slide. How many times do we ignore that kind of treatment? How many times do we say it's not worth it and just move on? Another colleague, a young woman named Priya, added, When I first joined this company, I was afraid to speak up about things like this. Watching you today, it reminded me that silence doesn't fix injustice. Tanya looked around the table. That's why we're going to do something more, not just with this one incident. I want a full training program across all our partner institutions on bias, respect, and inclusive service. I want every bank, every vendor, every representative to know, if you work with Haristech, you treat everyone with dignity. Her team nodded in agreement. The rest of the day moved quickly. Calls came in from media contacts who had heard whispers of the story. Emails poured in from colleagues across the industry, some asking what happened, others offering quiet support. Tanya didn't give interviews. She didn't post on social media. She wasn't interested in fame or attention. What mattered to her was change. Later that evening, the regional director called again. Dr. Harris, I just wanted to personally let you know we've officially terminated the employees involved in the incident. Their behavior violated multiple policies, and we're also launching internal retraining across all branches in the district. Thank you, Tanya replied. Calmly, that's a start. But let's go beyond the district. Make this a national training requirement. I'm willing to help you design it. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. There was a pause on the line. Then he said, honestly, we'd be honored to have your input. What you did today. It's already sparked conversations in places where change is long overdue. After the call ended, Tanya sat back in her chair. She thought of the people in the bank again, the manager who had doubted her, the teller who had spoken with coldness, the staff member who had laughed in the background. Were they sitting at home now, thinking about what happened? Were they realizing the mistake they made? Or were they angry, confused, still not understanding why things had gone so far? She didn't feel joy from their firing. She never wanted to ruin anyone's life. but she also knew that some lessons had to come the hard way. Sometimes, people needed to feel the consequences of their actions before they changed, she thought. Of a young black girl walking into a bank 5 years from now, maybe she'd be opening her first account. Maybe she'd be applying for a loan. Maybe she'd be dressed in jeans and sneakers, nothing fancy. And maybe, just maybe, the teller behind the desk would look at her and see her potential, not her skin, not her clothes, not her accent, but her potential. That was the world Tanya wanted to help create. The next morning, Tanya received a letter from the national office of the bank. It was an official apology, signed by the CEO of the company. The letter expressed regret for the mistreatment she had faced, promised company-wide reform, and asked for her continued partnership in helping build a more inclusive service experience. Tanya. Read it silently. It was respectful and sincere. But she knew it wasn't enough on its own. Words were good, but actions mattered more. She replied with a simple message: "Thank you for your apology. I look forward to seeing the change in action. My office is open if you need help building what comes next." Later that week, Tanya visited another bank branch in a different part of the city. This time, it wasn't for business. It was to meet a group of young interns who were being trained in customer service. She walked into the training room, and the faces of the young trainees lit up with excitement. Many of them had read about her in news articles, watched her speeches online, and admired her success story. One of the interns, a young black man named Xavier, stood up nervously and said, "Ma'am, I just want to thank you. What you did. It meant something to people like me. I want to work in finance, but I always worry I won't be taken seriously. Seeing you stand up the way you did, it gives me hope." Tanya smiled and walked over to him. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't ever doubt that you belong. Don't wait for permission to lead. And if someone tries to close a door, on you open your own." The room clapped, and Xavier smiled wider than he had in days. As Tanya drove home that evening, she felt something new in her heart. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even pride. It was peace, because she knew she hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for every person who had ever been judged too quickly, dismissed too easily, or silenced too often. She had gone into a bank that day, expecting a 10-minute task. Instead, she had become a voice, a lesson, and a leader stronger than ever before. After everything that had happened at the bank, Tanya Harris knew the journey was far from over. The immediate problem, the disrespect, the discrimination, and the firing of the branch team was resolved. But deep down, Tanya understood that this incident was a small part of a much bigger issue that affected countless people every day. It was about systemic bias, about how society and business sometimes treat people unfairly because of who they are or what they look like. Tanya had taken a strong stand, but she wanted to do more. She wanted to create real change that lasted. Over the next few weeks, Tanya's life became a whirlwind of meetings, interviews, and planning sessions. Her company's PR team was busy managing the growing attention from media outlets. News channels wanted to interview her. Business magazines wanted her story. Social media exploded with people sharing the story, some in support, some in disbelief. Tanya never expected such a massive reaction, but she accepted it as part of the responsibility she carried. Even though Tanya was busy, she made sure to stay focused on what really mattered, turning this moment into an opportunity for education and transformation. One of her first moves was to create a new initiative inside Harris Tech. She called it the Respect and Inclusion Project. The goal was simple but powerful: to make sure no one, whether a client, employee, or partner, ever faced discrimination or disrespect because of their identity. Tanya gathered her top team and began designing workshops, training programs, and outreach activities. They wanted to educate people about unconscious bias, teach empathy, foster a culture of inclusion in every corner of their company and beyond. Tanya also reached out to the bank's corporate headquarters again. She wanted to partner with them on these programs. She believed that change needed to come from both sides, the companies and the people who serve customers every day. The bank's CEO was surprisingly open to her ideas. he admitted that the incident had been a wake-up call for the entire industry. They agreed to roll out mandatory training sessions in every branch nationwide. Tanya's team helped develop the curriculum, sharing real stories and examples to make the lessons clear and meaningful. Meanwhile, Tanya didn't stop at just working with the bank.
Audrey started speaking at conferences, universities, and industry
Events about her experience. Her story wasn't just about being denied service or firing employees. It was about leadership, courage, and the importance of standing up for what's right. She inspired many people, especially young women and people of color, to believe in themselves and demand respect. At one event, a young woman approached Tanya with tears in her eyes. She shared that she had been hesitant to apply for leadership roles because she was afraid of discrimination. Tanya listened carefully and encouraged her to push forward, reminding her that every barrier broken helped those who came after. Tanya also made sure to listen to others. She held roundtable discussions inside her company where employees shared their own stories of bias and exclusion. These conversations were sometimes hard. People spoke about moments when they felt invisible or doubted because of their race, gender, or background. Tanya took notes and promised to keep working on policies that promoted fairness and respect. In the months that followed, Harris Tech's culture began to shift. The Respect and Inclusion Project became a central part of the company's values. New hires were trained not only in their technical skills, but also in empathy and respect. Employees reported feeling safer and more valued at work. Tanya felt proud, but also knew the work was never done. Outside of work, Tanya's story became a symbol of change in the community. Local schools invited her to speak to students about leadership and overcoming obstacles. Community organizations asked her to help develop programs that supported young people facing discrimination. Tanya gave generously of her time because she believed that leadership wasn't just about business success. It was about making life better for everyone. The media continued to follow Tanya's journey, often highlighting the contrast between the rude bank employees and the strength and grace with which she handled the situation. Some critics tried to say she was too harsh, that firing the branch staff was too extreme. Tanya welcomed the criticism, using it as a chance to explain why accountability matters. She said that respect isn't optional and that businesses must be responsible for how their employees treat others at one point. Tanya's company received a special award from a national diversity organization. The award recognized Harris Tech's commitment to inclusion and social justice. Tanya accepted it on behalf of her whole team, saying that the real credit went to everyone who dared to speak up and demand fairness. However, despite all the successes, Tanya sometimes felt the weight of the struggle. Fighting against bias and discrimination wasn't easy, especially as a woman of color in the corporate world. There were days when she felt exhausted and frustrated, but every time she thought about giving up, she remembered why she started. She remembered the young girl who might one day walk into a bank or an office and be treated with respect because of the work she was doing now. One quiet evening, Tanya sat alone in her office, reflecting on how far she had come from being denied. Basic service at a bank to leading a movement for change. It was a journey full of challenges, but also hope. She realized that real leadership meant using her voice not just for business, but for justice. It meant standing up when it was easier to stay silent and believing in a better future. Tanya's story showed that one moment can change everything. A moment of discrimination became a moment of action, A moment of hurt became a moment of healing, and a moment of doubt became a moment of courage. She knew that change doesn't happen overnight, but with each step forward, the world becomes a little more fair, a little more kind, a little more ready for leaders like her and for all those who will come after. And in that, Tanya found her greatest strength, the power to turn pain into progress and to inspire others to do the same. If you want, I can help you with further expansions or summaries too.